I think
And I
that's
think
an
that's,
important thing for people to think about as well.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I have to say that one of the really important lessons I think all of us have learned in the last year or so uh, is that, the bombastic personality, the sort of know-it-all person, isn't the person who is the most admired for being a leader. It is the thoughtful person. It is the truthful person. It is the person who says, well, gee whiz, I may not know all about this, but I'm going to go figure it out and get back to you. It is the person who acknowledges her, conditions or opportunities and says, this is how I'm going to go about it. I really think that, if nothing else, the president's low poll numbers demonstrate that what we want more as Americans is, for instance, someone like Barack Obama, who was open and honest and truthful and, worked hard,
Yeah.
and said, I used to be a smoker, but now I'm not, and I'm still struggling with it. Or, that's a sort of mundane example, but you're right. The importance of saying who you are and having other people understand that they can say that too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that they can run for office or be a leader in the workplace is just immeasurably important. I mean, just hugely important, and a great contribution to kind of the common good, because none of us are perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we just aren't.
I know we talked earlier about how more women are running for office now. But in 2016, women held only 23% of government offices in the United States. Why do you think women aren't being proportionally represented in American government? What do you think is holding us back?
Great question, an important thing to understand. There are several reasons, not in order of importance. One is the weight of history. Just to put it in context, it wasn't until, quote, the year of the woman of 1992, which is only 25 years ago, right, that a meaningful number of women were elected to the U.S. Senate. So, by way of example, and at that time, most state legislatures were way under 20% of women elected. So, the whole movement of women into public office is quite a recent one. That said, the progress has been, pretty slow. And I would say that the reason it's slow are the sort of systemic barriers, which have been historically women wait to be asked and men don't. You have to raise your hand and say, yes, I want to do this. If you wait to be asked, you might never be. Secondly, that it's been true that the people who make the decisions about who's going to get to run for a given office, rural, urban, wherever it is, tend to be the people already holding office or power. And of course, that has tended to be male. And so they tend to pick other guys. So that's a significant problem. A third challenge has been, but this is changing, that women tend to defer running for office until they are older than men are. And when you ask them why, they say, well, gee, I had significant family responsibilities. I had to get my kids off to college or whatever it was. And, by the time they do that, the guys have already grabbed up all the positions, so there's less opportunity. And another big reason, there are others, but these are the big ones in my mind. Another big reason is that, or barrier, has been the reluctance of, I guess, people with political power and influence to make it possible for women to run for executive office. So mayor, governor, county board president, that kind of thing. And so, women have been largely locked out of those positions. So, of course, that diminishes the total number. So, for instance, these days, as you probably know, there are 6 out of 50 women governors. We've never had a woman president, obviously. So I think the challenge going forward to get to a better number is to systematically address each of these barriers. And for instance, for the women who do hold office, to, just push the door open and demand that interested women have the opportunity to present their case. And I think that's happening more. I think it's also true that, men of goodwill could look at this and say, or should look at this and say, diversity at decision-making tables is a good thing. How can we get that at our table? And then affirmatively, make that happen. And I guess the last thing is to recognize that when women do run, they do as well as men do. So for those who are in power who may fear that a woman, if they nominate a woman, she's not going to win, they're wrong about that.
I want to just follow up fast on one thing that you had said. You had mentioned that a lot of women delay running for office because they have kids. How do we address those specific challenges for women with children? Because not everybody can or should have to wait until their kids are grown up. Kelly and I both have kids, and, we'd both like to run for office one day.
Right. Well, historically, that was what was happening. As I believe I said, that's now changing. And it's changing because, first and foremost, for those women who have partners, whether other women or men, who want to run for office, they are saying to them, parenthood isn't one parent's responsibility. So, let's figure out how we're going to split this task equally. So that's for starters. And, given the fact that I believe it's a majority of American women with children work outside the home, that's particularly true of people lower down on the income scale, it becomes even more important for those women, if they have a partner, to sit down with the partner and figure this out, because they have a huge amount of responsibility and it's disproportionate. I did spend, I believe, after the fundraising chapter, this might be the longest one in my book, I did talk to several, probably a lot of the women I interviewed are mothers, but two young mothers specifically, or mothers, I should say, with young children, one of whom was Lisa Madigan. And for those who may be listening who don't know, she is the current Attorney General of the state of Illinois, who first ran for AG when she was in her 30s. And when I interviewed her for the book, her daughter Rebecca was quite young, and we talked about this. And one thing that Lisa said to me, which I have said innumerable times in speeches, is that what she has said, and then I have repeated, which is that no one has the right to take your dreams away from you. Not your children, not your partner, not your parents, not your grandparents, nobody. Your dreams are as important and as legitimate as anyone else's. And once you absorb that truth, you then say that truth to everyone else in your life and say, this is something I want to do. And let's figure out how I'm going to be able to do it.
Yeah, I think too that we might start to see sort of a re-envisioning of what a politician should look like. So certainly as we see more women in office, but I have to think if I ran for office now, while my kids are still pretty young, that I would bring them with me, as much as I could. Obviously, you can't do that to a fancy fundraising dinner, but if I'm going out canvassing, I might want to have my children nearby.
Absolutely.
Or if I'm going out and collecting signatures, that sort of thing. And I think that would be a really healthy thing for us to see more of, not just women doing, but all candidates, sort of acknowledging that they have families and they have lives.
I think that's exactly right, and I think people love that, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, when I was, I think, 8 years old was when my father ran for Congress. And he took me with him, not everywhere. I went with him. Now, I don't know whether, and I have 4 siblings, and my mother, I'm sure, said, great, David, take Becca. So yeah, I think you're right. And why not? Just as you want, to see your children, that you might want to see, where you work or where your partner works. It's a similar kind of thing. So, yes, I think that's a great idea.
while we're talking about kids, why don't we, for a minute, talk about for our listeners who have daughters. Sophie and I both have sons, but for our listeners who have
Mhm.
daughters, how we can encourage our daughters to think about themselves as potential candidates or
Mhm.
potential leaders in the future.
You know, I love that question. I think in the first place, it's about teaching daughters to think of themselves as autonomous, independent, powerful individuals, right? Who can decide to be, you know, to run for office or be an astronaut or be a doctor or, whatever it is. So, because that first thing, as we've discussed, is I am somebody. I have something to contribute, right? So you have to believe that about yourself and hear that from others, and then you can kind of assess, well, gee, what is it I want to do about that knowledge about myself and my capacity to make a contribution to others. So I think that's the first step, and whatever that is, a daughter who is encouraged to lead a patrol in her Girl Scout troop or to become a star in a STEM class or, whatever it is that gives her that sense of autonomy and power and intelligence and ability to make decisions for herself. And then if you find that, well, what she's really interested in is sort of public leadership and public questions, then you can, as you pointed out earlier, if someone's running for office, maybe she can accompany them or she can join a club at school that relates to current events. Or she can join an organization that promotes girls as leaders. There is at least one training program also right now for girls who think they're interested in politics. And so that also would be an option at the right point.
Yeah, my parents have been going through some of my old school paperwork that's still sitting in their house and trying to get me to take it. My mom ran across a piece of paper that I had gotten, I think it was in fourth or fifth grade, from a teacher saying, I hope you pursue your dream to be president someday.
Oh, dynamite. Well, see, there you are.
So someday, if I'm president, that's going to be framed in my office.
That's absolutely, and I would just say to you that this girls program, there's one called Running Start. They're training young women like you were at that time. So a lot of girls know this is something they want to do.
I wonder too if there's something we can do to encourage girls. I'm thinking of there's a section in the book where you talk about Debbie Stabenow and how she wanted to help. I think it was elderly people in nursing homes, and she didn't yet know all the minutia, but she knew that she wanted to help. And what I have found often in talking to women, and I don't want to paint too broad a brush here, but I found it more often in talking to women than in men. That if I've asked somebody to be on the podcast or to write an article for our blog, that women very often they sort of doubt their own expertise and they want to sort of really make sure they know everything before they commit to anything. And I haven't found that as much talking to men, that men are often, yeah, I can figure it out. And so maybe we can help encourage, there might be somewhere in the middle of that that's the appropriate place to be. But, help encourage women and girls to sort of think of the expertise that they do have and think of the things they can contribute without worrying over much about sort of being perfect first before trying.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That has been a sort of typical thing for women, and I think it's sort of related in a way to that point I was making about waiting to be asked, because women tend to, I can't ask until I know everything, right? And or I can't request being at that meeting or presenting my candidacy. I have to just know so much more. And so I'm glad you mentioned Debbie's story, because she is, one of the senior members of the U.S. Senate among a handful of women who've ever been in the Senate. And mind you, from that place 40 years ago when she ran, I think it was in